For those who were here last week, we talked about the ultimate blessing, which is our salvation story. We saw Paul's story in Ephesians 2, how there was the beginning, middle, and end. And as we were talking about the ultimate blessing, I thought, what better course to take next is to talk about part of that blessing is the grace that we have. As you know, grace is unearned, but it's given freely to us. And I want to talk about a brave grace. Basically, I'm going to show you what grace looks like in action. I learned the hard way a number of years ago. I went through church planting training through the North American Mission Board. And Teresa and I, this is about a year or two before Ripley was blessed to come to us through birth. Teresa is an uber admin person. My spiritual gift is admin, but she is naturally gifted at admin. Best manager I've ever dealt with. That's what first attracted me to her when we worked at QBC together 100 years ago. So we had all the dots dotted and the T's crossed, and if we had that valedictorian of training, we would have done it. But I learned the hard way. There's theory, and then there's practical. So everything I thought was going to happen, we stumbled and fell. And within 18 months, we closed the door that God, but I know that was God's training going, this is what I want you to do, but not this time. So actual is better than theory. So we're going to look at grace practical, not in theory. This reminds me of a story of a man. He was in an auto accident, had a minor injury, but he really wanted to stick it to the insurance. So he got his brother-in-law, who was a shady attorney, and went, let's get all the money we can from the insurance. And to his disbelief, the insurance would not settle, so they went to court. So this man was in the witness stand, and the lawyer of the insurance and went, okay, Mr. Smith, we understand you hurt your shoulder in the accident. Yes, I did. Could you please show us how high you can reach now? He kind of generally, slowly went like this. He said, okay, thank you, Mr. Smith, put it down. Could you please show the court how high you could go before the injury? He went, okay. And as soon as he did that, the lawyer smiled and he went, ugh. Caught red-handed, lying to the court. Have you ever been caught red-handed? Parents, you know this. You're in the living room, you hear a ruckus in the kitchen, and you go to investigate, and you see your obedient, loving child with a handful of cookies. The same cookies you just told them minutes before they could not have. Busted, right? How about this? A little closer to home for some of us, and I say some of us. You're humming down the highway, minding your own business, listening to the tunes, having fun. All of a sudden, you see blue lights in your rearview mirror. You look down, you see your speed, and you go, ugh. There's nothing you can say, nothing you can go out. You know you're over the speed limit. You're caught red-handed. Sin makes an impact. Sin makes an impact. And we're going to talk a particular sin in verse 8 on John chapter 8. And this sin is adultery. Adultery is a sin because it mocks what God created. Marriage. Marriage should be between a man and a woman for a lifetime. It should never end unless death occurs. But we make it so easy to nullify. I'm reading through Luke right now. I read through all the Gospels once during the year in order to see how to be an under-shepherd by reading what the great shepherd does. And this week I read how Jesus stuck it to the religious sect about, they asked about the divorce thing. And he told them what God intended for marriage to be, not what man is. But adultery mocks marriage. It ruins families. It scars children. It reminds me, most of you know this, if you know it, I work at Dollar Tree stores. I work at the corporate headquarters, which is that 13-story monstrosity on in the Greenbrier area. They said it's 12 stories, but the 12th is 2-story. But I worked there. I've been there for 24 years. And there was a young man, one of the guys I was coaching at the time, sharp young man, had a beautiful wife, had a baby. And he came to me one day. He sat down in my cubicle. Our cubicles have a little bench. He said, Tom, I need to talk to you. I said, okay, fine. What's up? What's going on? He said, my wife's left me. I was like, oh, I'm sorry to hear that. She doesn't want to be married anymore. We had to get married. And I said, okay. And as he was talking about how she went clubbing and started sleeping around and that he's beside himself, and all of a sudden, all my training kicked in of the psychology he had at Liberty about how divorce will scar a child for 20, 30 years. In fact, people are still dealing with it. But I was thinking all that, and all of a sudden I went, he doesn't need to know the facts. He needs to have a shoulder to cry on. So I said, tell me about it. So he shared his heart with me. And I didn't say, well, if you kept the cow in the barn, you didn't have to get married, this would never happen. He didn't have ears to hear that. He had ears to hear, I'm sorry to hear that. I'm praying for you. How's your daughter? She was only about 18 months old at the time. And good news, through Facebook, he'd moved on. He's happily remarried, has a new child with this wife, and this lady is treating his daughter as her own. It's awesome. But it affects everybody. So this is the sin that we encounter in John chapter 8. And in John chapter 8, we will see Jesus deal with a challenge and will demonstrate a brave grace. And in our passage, we will see 4 points: the crime, the catch-22, the conclusion, and the compassion. The first thing we're going to look at, the first point, the crime. And I knew I wasn't going to do this, but I have to be me. As soon as I say the crime, Law and Order pops in my head, and I hear dun-dun. So the crime, dun-dun, verses 1 through 3. But Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. Early in the morning he came again into the temple, and all the people were coming to him. And he sat down and began to teach them. The scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman caught in adultery, and having sat her in the center of the court. Okay. For the 5 weeks I've been with you, you know I need to put things in context. In order for us to understand what's going on, we need to know the context. The context of this is Jesus is in Jerusalem for one of the festivals. John shows us only 18 months of Jesus' life. John shows the highlights. That's why you see Jesus in Jerusalem 4 times. He experiences 4 Passovers. John's focus is to show Jesus as the God-man. So he shows us the signs that show us he's divinity. So this is what he does. He's there for one of the festivals. He goes to the temple. That's where people are. He does it while he's there. A rabbi, when he teaches, will sit, and the people will stand around him and listen to their teach. That's the Oriental custom. Us Easterners, you guys sit, and I stand and massacre the King's English. So he sits, and he's teaching them the laws, the prophets, answering questions. So this is either day 2 or day 3, and all of a sudden, as he's teaching, he hears a ruckus coming. And he looks up and hears these guys with the nice fringe robes, with the nice big hats, pushing this lady that looks like she has a sheet over her. Her hair's all over the place. She's crying, probably bloodied from being slapped and pushed, being paraded in front of everybody. She's done the unspeakable. See, remember, at this time in the custom, women were property. Sorry, ladies, that's how it was. A woman was there to get money for the father as he basically sold his daughter to a guy that the dad chose. So this woman was probably in a marriage since she was 12, 13 years old, and for some reason she was in bed with someone other than her husband. So she disgraced her family, she disgraced the religion, and she disgraced herself. So she's being paraded by everybody. embarrassed, at wit's end, being pushed, being beaten. And then they don't place her in front of Jesus. They plop her. They push her down. So she's basically on the ground, on her knees, probably with her hands in her face, sobbing, scared to death for what's about to happen to her. That is the crime that this woman is charged with. She was right in the middle of doing something she was not supposed to do. All of a sudden, the doors flung open, and these angry men came in, grabbed her out, and drug her through the busy streets. Remember, this is a festival time, so the streets of Jerusalem were packed of travelers going, what in the world is going on here? And they see what's happening. They go, she did a no-no. Oh, no, she didn't. And they look away, and she's embarrassed. She's ashamed, and she knows what she's did, and she knows the end result that's going to happen to her. This takes us to our second point, the catch-22. Catch-22 basically is you're doomed if you don't, you're doomed if you do. I know I cleaned it up a little bit because we're in church, but the catch-22, we can see this in verses 4 through 6. And they, the religious guys, said to him, Teacher, or Rabbi, this woman was caught in adultery in the very act. Now the law of Moses commanded us to stone such a woman. What do you say? They were saying this, testing him, so they might have grounds for accusing him. But Jesus stooped down with his finger and wrote on the ground. Now, see, the Pharisees thought they had Jesus. From the very beginning of his ministry, in another book, Luke, since I'm reading through it, it's fresh in my mind, that from the very beginning, within his first year, they targeted him to try to discredit him, try to get him out of the way, because he wasn't an average rabbi. So they thought, okay, we got this guy. He'd say, we asked him, he's in a hard place. He's between a rock and a hard place. This gang of guys, they didn't care about this woman. Remember, scribes and Pharisees. A scribe is someone that basically has a master's in the Jewish educational. The scribe memorized and knew all the Old Testament. They didn't study it, they memorized it. So they know all the law, all the prophets, the history. And the Pharisees are pretty much the police force, the religious police force. And I was just talking to Gary and Kathy earlier about how I used to be a Pharisee in my teens, in my early 20s. But there's always a Pharisee above the Pharisee, because I went to Bible college in Missouri, and I thought I was conservative until I went there. And I called it the buckle of the Bible belt, where people that would call me liberal, even though I wasn't. But it's always one-upmanship, the Pharisee. They hold on to the religion. And Pharisees started out good. It was right after the exile. Remember, we studied Nehemiah, how God reestablished Judah and Jerusalem. And there's a group of men that went, we no longer want to have that roller coaster of being blessed and being judged by God. So they went out of the way to say, this is where we need to be. And they started out good. But like anything good, it morphs. It gets distorted 200 or 300 years after the fact. Now these are the sanctimonious people that want to be seen, and they create 680 laws out of the 10 commandments. So these guys, basically, they didn't care about the woman. They wanted to get Jesus in trouble because, see, God gave the law as a standard to Israel. He gave them the law, the 10 commandments, to say, hold these are good. So these leaders should have been there for the people, but they're using it as a weapon. Because, see, adultery is one of those crimes that was punishable by death. You did not get a bygones. You did not get a mulligan. It's like you're caught in adultery, you're dead. See, it's the same level as murder, kidnapping, and witchcraft. And the penalty of death is by stoning. It's a messy thing. Stoning was a warning. Don't do this or this will happen to you. This is what happens in stoning. They take the person outside the town. They dig a hole. They put the person in a hole up to their waist. They fill in the hole so they can't move anywhere. The person that accuses, the number one accuser, is the one that's supposed to cast that first stone. In the law, the stone had to be big enough to harm. It couldn't be a little pebble. It had to be a big boulder. So that person who accused them, their first job was to throw it. And then after they threw it, everyone else started throwing it. It's a messy, bloody thing. Most likely that first stone or first boulder either killed the person or they were unconscious. But it's bloody, messy, and that was what these guys were saying that this woman deserved. And by the law, that's what she deserved. The law says no adultery, do adultery, you're a dead person walking, basically. So Jesus is there, the scribes are there, and their motivation, they were not pure as the driven snow. Yellow snow is purer than they are. They didn't care about the adultery. They didn't care about the woman. They wanted to get this rabbi out of the picture because he was getting popular, basically. And they said, okay, what do you say, sir? Here's an unsolvable puzzle. What do you say? It's clear. The law, the Ten Commandments, the punishment is what? Death. So if Jesus said, okay, death is the requirement, death is what she deserved. If Jesus said that, he would get in trouble with the Roman Empire. Because at that time, the Roman Empire was the only ones that could execute people. They had to get permission from the governor, Pilate, to do anything other than little punishments. Capital punishments, they had to go to Pilate, and Pilate had to sign off on it. So if Jesus said, okay, the punishment is death, carry it out, he would get in trouble with the Roman Empire. So, but if Jesus said, well, you know, the law says this, but let's do this instead, he could get in trouble with the people. Because he would, basically, they would say, this rabbi is putting himself above the law. How dare he? So, what did Jesus do? He started writing. He ignored them completely. That was his response. And if you know anything about human condition, that aggravated him. If you ask someone a question and they ignore you and do something else, how does that make you feel? It ticks me off. So basically, Jesus is sitting there teaching, and they're doing their case. He gets up, kind of stoops, starts writing. And then they come up to him and go, what are you doing? And that leads us to the third point, the conclusion. Verse 7 says this, but when they persisted, remember, he's ignoring them, he's writing, they get indignant because they think they're the most important people out there. But that when they persisted in asking him, he straightened up and said to them, he who is without sin among you, let him be the first to throw a stone at her. Again, he stooped down and wrote on the ground. When they heard it, they began to go out one by one, beginning with the older ones, and he was left alone with the woman where she was in the center of the court. See, verse 6 tells us, he ignores them, starts writing. Verse 7, he writes again. We're never told what he wrote, but this is the same finger that wrote the Ten Commandments. This is the same finger that carved every commandment on the tablets that Moses held. This is the same hand that appeared in Daniel. The same finger that wrote on the wall that judged Belshazzar and says, you are wanted in balance, weighed in balance, and found wanting. This is the same hand that wrote the Ten Commandments, wrote judgment. Now he's writing on the ground. We're not told. We're not told. One of the guys I worked with, when the senior pastor of the church I worked as executive pastor, he actually said he probably just wrote a grocery list. This guy's more sarcastic than I am. I don't think he wrote a grocery list. I think he wrote the Ten Commandments. First time, the Ten Commandments. And then, remember, the Pharisees and scribes came up closer and stepped back. Because he said, those who without a sin throw the first stone. They see the Ten Commandments. And they know they're not as pure as driven snow when it comes to the Ten Commandments. And then he goes to the next level. Probably writing names beside the Ten Commandments. The names of the men that were standing there. When they first saw their names beside the sin that they're guilty of, their secret sin. See, we all have secret sin. There's a saying, projection. It's a psychology. Basically, what you're feeling guilty, you project it on someone else. I remember our church secretary at the church I just mentioned, she was going through nursing school. And her husband, he was in my men's group, kind of a scoundrel, con man sort of guy, basically would not let her sleep because she was studying with this young man. And he's like, you're sleeping with him. You're doing this. You're doing that. And she finally came up to us and went, I can't sleep. I'm studying. I cannot get sleep. My husband is bothering me. I'm not doing anything with this young man. He's young enough to be my brother. And it came out, basically we found out he was the one going around playing the field, because at the time on Facebook, they separated, and within a week or two, he was having pictures with another woman. I'm done, whoa, dude, it's not even 2 weeks after you guys separated. So these people are projecting their own guilt on this woman. So if you ever talk to someone and they project on you, they're dealing with stuff. I remember my second manager at Dollar Tree, we had to go to our distribution centers. I'm so glad it's not in the budget anymore. It was always a pain. He and I traveled 8 hours up to our Pennsylvania site, and I came back, no big deal. And someone said, oh, he couldn't stand traveling with you. He felt you were judging him. I was like, what are you talking about? Little did I know he's an alcoholic. And he had an idea that he was going to go to the hotel bar, and my job was to sit with him. But since I went to the room and not hang out with him, he felt judged because he knew I was a preacher, that I was judging him. I didn't care for him because he was a jerk, but I wasn't judging him because he was an alcoholic. But he was projecting his guilt of drinking on me, saying I was judging him, and I wasn't. See, these guys are caught red-handed. Not literally, because they would probably be penalized by death in some of the things they struggled with. My question to you is, what are your hidden secrets? I don't have any hidden secrets, Tom. No. My agenda is pure. There's a passage in the Bible, is that what you do in darkness will be made into light. Either when we stand before or kneel before Christ at the end of the times and we get judged by every word we say and every deed we do, or there's a passage, it's not in my notes, I can't remember the key, but I'll paraphrase it for you, is that when sin takes root, it brings death. So basically, that little innocent sin that you're doing, it produces death. It could produce the death of trust of your loved ones, a death of your person in society, or it could be the death of hell fire. But trust is hard to get earn back. I speak that from experience with my wife, is that it takes years to build back and it takes a second to lose. So make sure whatever you're doing, this is your foundation. Look at it. Am I doing wrong? Remember, I mentioned a few weeks ago that flirting with your coworker isn't wrong because you're not doing anything, but it is an emotional affair. Tom, you don't understand. My husband doesn't listen to me anymore. And Joe, in accounting, he listens to me bellyache, and I feel so much better. But are you going to Joe for your affirmation or your husband? Guys, a coworker puffs you up, going, "Oh, you're so handsome. You're so smart. Man, whenever I need help with this, you're always there to lift it up. You're like that guy from the Planet Hollywood. I lift them up and put things down. Guy, you're so strong and you feel good about yourself, right?" You go, "Tom, my wife doesn't do that anymore." Be like a coworker. I worked as a temp the first couple of years we were married, and I remember this young lady. She's about 20 years old, belly aching about her husband. They met when they were in high school, and he had a six-pack, and now he has a keg. And I remember thinking, okay, that's stupid. But everyone changes. But it's what you do in secret will be made into light. And that's what happened to these scribes and Pharisees. What they thought no one knew, maybe looking a little too long to their neighbor's wife, or maybe a little envious that their neighbor had 2 camels instead of 1 camel. When Jesus put down covenant, do not covenant your neighbor's wife, the old guy dropped a stone and walked away. Maybe when one of the younger guys saw, do not covenant your neighbor's possessions, he dropped the rock and walked away. Maybe he said, do not lie. Another guy just dropped a stone and walked away. When it was all said and done, no one was there. Put yourself, remember I said, put flesh and blood in these people. Put yourself in this woman's position. She's down on her knees, her hands over her face. She's not looking around. She dare not look at a famous rabbi's eyes because she's thinking this guy's going to judge me as harsh as these yahoos are. So she's like this, and every thump of the ground behind her, she winces, thinking, is this going to be the stone that hits me? And then what happens? The compassion happens. This is my favorite part. Oh my goodness, this is my favorite part. When I read the gospel, I get teary-eyed when I read this. When Jesus shows compassion, you can hear it in the words. And I love it when Jesus sticks it to the religious people. But the compassion from this man in verse 10, the last point. Straightening up after he wrote, Jesus said to her, "Woman, where are they?" See, Jesus has a great sense of humor. It's like you can almost see his tongue in his cheek. Where are they? Did no one condemn you? She said, "No one, Lord." Jesus says, "I do not condemn you either. Go from now on, sin no more." So the great judge, the one that had the qualifications to judge, he acquits. This woman is sitting there on her knees looking at the eyes that she was expecting anger, judgment in those eyes. But when she looked up and made eye contact, she saw compassion, love. That is amazing. He doesn't condemn her. He acquits her. And I love this part when he answers the question, "No one here to condemn you?" neither do I condemn you. It's like a ton of bricks fall off her shoulders. I remember I had the ability when Teresa and I were friends and we were just hanging out, I had the opportunity to lead my future wife to Christ. And Teresa's background is that she went to church once in a blue moon. She was not raised in church. In fact, her biological father was killed in a coal mining accident when she was 4. She was from East Kentucky. And her mom moved to Lexington to get her degree. Her mom is a teacher. So her and her older brother were all by themselves. So every once in a while, they'd go to vacation Bible school, but that was about it. So she started coming to church with me as we're hanging out. And then one day, April 1st, I'm not exaggerating or kidding, April 1st, 1996, we were in her living room after watching a movie, now our living room. And I asked her a question. You know, when you close the deal for salvation, if you died today, would you go to heaven? I didn't even get the word heaven out when she said no. And then I showed her, because she got a Bible because she was going to church, how to get saved. And she got saved, and she told me later, as soon as we said amen, she felt a ton as just falling off her shoulders. Because she was 29 at the time, so she had 29 years of baggage, 29 years of poor decisions, 29 years of regret, 29 years of anger just melting off her shoulders because Christ came in and lit her heart. So this woman had a ton roll off her back. And she's like, oh. See, Jesus, not only did he excuse her sin, he told her not to do it anymore. Basically, when he said that, go and sin no more, he was saying, stop making sin a habit in your life. So when we confess our sin to God and Jesus says, you're forgiven, now stop it. Some of us are like me. You make the same mistake time and time and time again. I'm not the sharpest tool in the shed sometimes. A little hard-headed. I see it played out almost every day when I talk to Ripley. She's getting ready to turn 14 on Thanksgiving, 14 going on 30. Can't tell her anything. So I allow her to make her own mistakes, but she reaps what she sows. But I give her the grace. She looks at me time and time again and went, don't judge me, Dad. It's like, honey, I'm not judging you. I am pointing out the obvious. You did this, right? Yes. Were you told not to do this? Yes. So you still chose to do it? Yes. That's why you're in trouble. Okay. But I still love you. That's what Christ does for us as his children. If you're a Christian here today, you're saved. You're secure. You'll never fall out of the love of God. You're sealed in his love. There's grace. And Jesus continues giving us this message. He doesn't write it on the ground. He wrote it on the cross. He doesn't write it with his finger. He wrote it in his blood. Grace, not guilty, is the verdict. We will stand before the judgment seat of Christ one day, and then we will hear not guilty, because we will stand up, and then right beside us will be Jesus Christ. So when the Heavenly Father, the ultimate judge, sees us, he'll see Jesus with us and go, not guilty, enter into heaven. It's nothing that we've done. We saw that last week in Ephesians 2. There's nothing that we could do to earn grace. Remember, faith means nothing away from grace. We have faith to accept what Christ did on the cross only because God gave us grace to hear and see our need of our salvation. Because of our story can be a story of grace, for it is grace that fixes all the broken lives. Grace heals broken wounds. See, some of us are living with labels that we did not give ourselves. We're living with decisions that we made because. We need to default to grace because that's what we got. Point Harbor Church is our home church. I've been affiliated with them since 1984. When I was 14, it was Fellowship Baptist Church. And over the years, and now I always love this. John Houston is the senior pastor, and Tom Tuttle and Dan Blakesley are the executive pastors. And they always say this: they default to grace. When someone messes up, they offer grace to them. They don't give them judgment. They hear them out. They give them grace. So as God's people, we need to default to grace when we deal with people. Because, see, we are to pay it forward to others. We have salvation. We have grace because God gave us that grace. We need to show that grace to others. Reminds me of a story a friend of mine told me. He lives in Arizona now, but he was in the Navy for a number of years, and his 2 children were soccer players, and they were good soccer players, the elite soccer players. And I would go out to Churchland soccer field every once in a while when they were practicing, and they were good. And he told me a story one time that the summer session was coming out. He got a brand new team, and he wanted to see who knew what, who was good at what. So basically, he let them play. And he told me one time that he had 12 kids playing, and unbeknownst to him, there was, if you ever been to Churchland Middle School, there was a playground right next to the soccer field. And all of a sudden, he sees a 13th kid running around. And they had white shirts and blue shirts, and they were scrimmaging, and this kid blended in because he had a plain undershirt, white T-shirt. So he called them all in, and he was saying all the names, and he saw this kid, the Latin young kid that didn't speak English, and one of the parents went, "He's not one of ours." And this kid kind of looks up, and he knew what was going on, even though he didn't know English all that well. And he knew that this big, gruff-looking guy, he's a really nice guy. He's just a big, mean-looking guy, but a tender-hearted guy, was about to pass judgment on him, on his soccer career, that he was going to be able to play or if he's going to be kicked to the curb. And Daryl went, "Oh, really? Oh, okay. Let's all go play." And the little boy's eyes lit up and went out and started playing with the other kids. See, none of us deserve to be on God's team. We haven't earned it. We didn't even pay the price to be on it. Yet, because of His grace, Jesus chose us to be on the best team, His team. We can experience and exhibit this grace to others. This grace does not count sin. God doesn't count our sin against us. We're not supposed to count other wrongdoings toward us. A number of years ago, I did I have a passion to see men grow. And we did a Bible study on a book called Forgiveness. A lady that is my second mom, Mama Love. I call her Mama Love. Her and her friend did this for the ladies, and she gave me the book. Said, "Tom, read this. This would be great for the guys." So I read it, and we had about 15 men in our church come out for it. And basically, it was teaching the men how to forgive others. And I remember this one guy, he's my age, he's executive at Starbucks. And he's told me stories all about their Starbucks organization. They're very whack. But I was talking to him afterwards. He said, "Tom, thank you for teaching this course. It's helping me to forgive my grandmother." His grandmother hated men. So she abused him physically and emotionally from a baby up until his teen. He was able to forgive her. He was able to give her grace because he saw just how much God has forgiven him, his trespasses and his sins. There's a saying, if you've been forgiven much, you should be given much. I'm not sure your background. I'm not sure what God has forgiven you of. Me, I was forgiven a really bad cookies and milk addiction at 7. And he forgave me of that and saved me at 7. I know it's kind of chuckle. That's my testimony. But some of you have testimonies of God forgiving alcoholism, drug abuse, sexual abuse. You're forgiven those. So you can give grace to those people. I love Casting Crown. Lord willing, I say might, because it's been 4 years since I sang, might sing one of their songs next week when I preach on revival. You convinced me to preach on that I told you about. But there's a song from their first LP, CD, album, whatever you want to call it. And the video basically shows this woman as a waitress and serving coffee to kids that are from church. And the words like, you never know what her background is, you never know what she's been in. She's looking for something, and we are her hope. Not that we're her hope, but the message we have in us is our hope. You have no idea where people are that God puts in your path. Your coworkers, your waitress, your waiter. A conversation yesterday, I kind of felt sorry for him. I went Kroger shopping yesterday, and this kid maybe looked 18. And I started talking to him. I'm becoming more like my mom every day. She's 76. So I talk to strangers. And he was joking about with me. He said, oh, I love talking to people. You never know. You might get a holy grunt from these cashiers. But you never know. You don't know what they went through the night before. So love them where they are. Because you know why? God loved us where we were when we first had that encounter with Him. God gave us grace. Our job is to give that grace back to everyone that God has given us. As this week goes on and you think about the blessings that God has given you, next week when we do the communion, remember, you are no longer who you were because of God's grace is given to you. Let's pray.